So I'm going to talk to you today about the work we've done over the last, since the year 2000 really, about creating what I reluctantly call a modern landrace, but about the creation, performance of it, and these composite cross populations. Martin's given you some information already, but I'll go into more information on that. So I'll talk about the background, why we've come to doing what we're doing, a little about what the population is, and how we created it, but also then about our findings and implications that might be, and just a little bit about what we're doing with it now. So the picture at the bottom there shows you the population on the left and a conventional variety on the right. So our drivers were about really agriculture as a whole and society as a whole. So we needed to feed ourselves, and it needs to be now and in the future. We're in a situation where climate change is increasingly showing its face. So just talking to people last night, I know the situation in the UK, but actually hearing in Italy, and I'm in Spain a lot, we're now having very different types of springs. I was told last night that in Italy you had a very dry spring last year and a very wet spring this year. So we're getting these sort of extremes of climate. We know the energy use into conventional agricultural systems is very high, and we need to change that. The loss of agriculture and also all biodiversity is of great concern, and we're even getting some very conventional type people now coming back looking at that and saying we've got to do something about it. But also if you look at the sort of broader context of this about who's in control of the farming system, the farmer definitely isn't in control of the farming system anymore. They're really cost takers, price takers. They grow what they have to grow, and actually they have very little input into the system other than producing it and selling it on in most cases. And so we're actually now in a situation where we have an industrialized system where one size fits all. It's produced somewhere, it's maybe processed somewhere else and bought somewhere else, and now consumed somewhere else. And we're continually driven down the monocultural route. There are benefits. So for the farmer, there's an easy system here about it's easy to plant, harvesting and marketing, it's all designed. This basically comes with a toolkit. And actually for each variety of whether it's a wheat or a barley or a vegetable, they know how to treat it. They know when they've got to spray it. There's decision support systems. They plug it all in. Lots of data's coming in. They know how to grow it. It's really grown by robots. And for the corporation and the industrial complex, great. They just keep churning out new varieties. They keep churning out new inputs that will go with it, or maybe not so many inputs anymore. Machinery increases in scale, but also we're getting new bits of kit. So drones are increasingly important, increasingly getting more information. So actually for the corporations, you can see they are producing the ancillary stuff. It's great for them. And actually it means that with the monoculture, we can have a larger industrial scale. Processing and marketing is all done in one place or through one system on an international process. And actually it's processed and distributed around the world. However, it does produce lock-ins. We've already said about we've got the loss of diversity, and actually quite often in this breeding, because actually all they're actually looking there is really for yield with some other areas, is actually breeding for disease, pests and diseases, because all those sort of systems are controlled through external input. It's increasingly using more fossil energy, and with that and with all the other inputs that goes into it, there's an increase in pollution and negative effects on the ecosystem, and increasingly and probably it is getting worse and worse, a loss of control by the farmer. The farmer is just taking basically what they have to do and producing it. So we stood back and thought, right, how do we address this? And this builds on a lifetime of Martin's work, but actually working within agroecological approaches and organic farming, we thought actually ecology is the route we should be looking at. So looking at the unifying concept of ecology from Leroux in 2010, there are positive correlations between diversity and stability, and also diversity and productivity. So as you become more diverse, systems generally become more stable, and also their productivity goes up. Okay, that may not be the productivity that your industrial complex wants, but actually we know the overall productivity goes up. But actually, how do we put this sort of concept into an artificial ecological system that is agriculture? So the composite cross populations seem the way to go forward. I used to use an old slide on this, and they're probably far too young in the room, most of this, looking at, it was during the Bush 1 era it might be Bush 2 era, of the United States. And there you could put up a monoculture, would be a Condoleezza rice would come up as being, if you had lots of rice, you had a monoculture, and actually you could mix it with a bush. But actually we had a population which was a crowd. But I've done this a little bit more, and I have the same set of pictures that have been used previously. So, what we say about a CCP is not a variety. It's not a variety. It's more than this. So they're not all the same. But also, as Martin's just mentioned, you could do mixtures, but it's not a mixture. But actually, what we're looking at here is a crowd. So if you like, we know you're a population. That's exactly what we're trying to look for in a wheat. So we're looking at individuals within this population. And what it does is create an extreme and a large range of biodiversity or diversity within the crop. What we did by crossing them, as we have, is produce a massive amount of diversity. And so what we then get, that gives us then is the 5 Cs. So the positive elements within this are about capacity. So there are more within your population, there are more phenotypic and genotypic variation, which gives you a great variation within the crop. And that picture, as you can see, the different phenotypes, whether they've got awns, the different sizes, the heights, and those sort of aspects. When you've got this, they can then complement each other. So different genotypes will complement each other. So if you've got one that's quite good for drought and one that's quite good for wet, in a droughty year, the phenotypes that are good in drought will do better, and in a wetter year, the wetter ones will do better. But also that then allows compensation, our 3rd C, which is about if one fails, the other can take over. So again, if you've got ones that aren't very good at establishing in wet weather, actually in a wet weather year, those ones that can establish better, they will actually take over and come through that. And also the other concept we have is about change and actually evolutionary shifts. I'm not going to present any information here on this, but actually we've looked at our population is now nearly 20 years old, and actually because unless we put it through a very tight evolutionary shift, so as we took it to Hungary and put it through a Hungarian winter, we saw a change there. But in the UK systems, we're not really seeing evolution happening, but over a 20-year process in a fairly benign environment, that's really not surprising. There is one negative we picked up on this diversity, and it's really a sort of the flip side of complementation, but actually there can be competition. If different individuals are very much alike and want to have the same niche, then there clearly can be competition between them. So what did we do with this? We generated our population in 2002. We took 20 different varieties. Martin showed you what they were earlier, the high yielding ones and the high quality ones, and we crossed them. The Bezesteyer appears in both. That's both a very high yielding and a good quality. So these 20 weren't quite as much. You wouldn't get the same numbers because Bezesteyer comes in twice. And this is just another way of presenting that half-tidal cross that Martin was showing with with his diagram. What came out of that was we ended up with we produced 3 CCPs, and as Martin said, about the Y, which had 36 crosses, the quality, which has 66 crosses, and the YQ, which has 107. If we just use mixtures, we'd only have 9 for the Y, 12 for the quality, and 20 for the YQ. And they'd be very fixed components. So we did this, and we let them self, and to create our F2 generations. And this is where I say we created our modern landrace. We'll talk more about what these definitions mean tomorrow or Friday. I'm a little uncomfortable with modern landrace. I think landrace has a lot of cultural elements to it as well, but we will discuss that later in the conference. So, now I just want to show you a little bit of the data and a bit of the information. We've been running these trials since 2003, 4, 5, and we have a vast amount of data we're still trawling through. Some of it is better than others. But I'll just go through some of the basic areas. So the 2007 and the 2010 trials were on the F6 to F8 generations. We looked at pure lines versus the mixtures of all these, of the parents, as well as the CCPs. And the data I'm going to show you is looking at replicated plot trials, which were done on farmer fields, but were within our control. So they were smaller plot trials, fully replicated. It was done over 4 years on 4 farms. 2 were organic, and so we ended up with 16 environments. So within this you can see that the pinky dots are the CCP, the green dots are the mixtures, and the blue dot is the variety, and the parental varieties. And whether it's a circle, it's for conventional, and the triangle's organic. And what this shows is that actually it's classic plant breeding plot. As you move towards the right, the environment is better. So it's more high-yielding environment for these varieties or for these things. And as you start moving back down to the left, it is a worse. So what we've got here is actually during good conditions, the CCP or the population doesn't perform as well as a mixture or as the individual varieties. But actually as we start moving down towards more challenging conditions, and that could be just we haven't got the inputs, or it could be climate change, it could be the environments we're going into, the CCP does perform much better within this. And what we're coming up with here then actually we know, so this is within very controlled situations, but actually, as Martin showed, if we're having more difficult and some even catastrophic conditions, you can then see how the CCP performs better. So we have a series of these. Martin showed the one with the weeds, and again, this is on Martin's farm. So this is in 2012. We put the winter trial in, and the plots at the front are the CCP, and the plots at the back are the control, which in this year was Alchemy, which was a very high, good performing conventional variety. This went in on the 16th of October, and we didn't quite get all the trials in that day, and the weather changed. So 9 days later, we dried up a bit, we could manage to get back in, and we re-sowed the next set of trials. And as you can see here, that actually clearly Alchemy couldn't cope with this sort of conditions. So this wasn't extreme, this wasn't floods or ice or these things. This was just actually, it wasn't a very good time to sow the seeds at this point. And as you can see, the CCPs have the elasticity where they can compensate and the capacity to grow is actually much greater. And so Alchemy basically failed. So a single variety has problems in doing that. So this was, these were plot trials we're showing here. We also then wanted a quick look at, again, looking at yield on a lot of work we've done is also with farmers. So we took the YQ population and sent that off to work with a number of farmers. And this was done, we asked them to plant a common control, we sent them, and also their own control, and the CCP. It was done across most of England, 7 farms. It was done for 2 years, so we ended up with 14 environments. Some of the farmers conventional, some of them were organic. And actually what we saw here was the lines became parallel. So when you get that greater noise within different, when you start actually going out onto the farms themselves, the benefits of the CCP were not seen as much. There was no significant, the slope of the lines are all parallel. So we decided then, what other things do we need to look at here? What do you want to see? What might be better? So of course, actually, it's not just grain yield we're looking at. We also know that we want to be improved in quality. So what we did here then was to have do further analysis, and particularly about, sorry, my mind's gone blank, then to look at composite, principal component analysis. And so what came out of here, we've got on here is the blue lines is the organic crop, and this is looking at the common control, which is the circles, the QCP, which is quality, is the triangle, the square is the yield, and the plus is the YQ. So this is all of the populations looking at how they fit across the different farms. And so we had one organic farm. The second organic farm, we had a failed crop, or not enough data to work on that. But the Benham and Metfield were both conventional. And what's come out of this is that actually shows that basically the common control of the varieties, and basically there's no difference between the farms on the yield of these varieties, because yield is basically perpendicular to these lines. What was then starting to come out is that actually protein, test weight, and hardness are much more improved in the populations. And actually the other interesting thing was actually how dependent they were on straw height. We took this even further, but to sort of focus more on the genetics. So this is again looking at Claire was the common control we were using, and then we have the blue is the yield population, the purple is the yield and quality, and the Q is the green is the quality one. So again, whereas quality parameters, especially hardness and test weight, depend much more on the variety, all the CCPs tended to perform better than the conventional. And what we're seeing here also is because of this relationship with how they are more associated with straw height, that might be an artifact the way we've selected varieties, because the Q varieties may well have higher straw height. We need to go back and look through the data on that. So in conclusions, what we think we found on just this basic short analysis of what we've got here is that pure lines have advantages over diverse cropping systems in high-yielding environments. That's really not surprising. We put there, they just throw everything they need, they perform very well. However, in low-yielding environments, these advantages tend to be turned upside down, and the CCPs and the mixtures perform much better in those systems. The other thing we're seeing, and again we need to look much more at this, at these more sort of extreme conditions, but is the CCPs may offer resilience towards extreme events. And they say, and I'm calling extreme events, but that is, we've just had a bit of a wet patch when we've got to get things in. And these are not, this resilience isn't achievable with pure lines because of their restrictions on their genetics. Quality parameters, especially hardness and test weight, depend much more on the variety or the CCP than they do on what farm they might have been grown in or what conditions. But actually what we know on that is actually all of the CCPs, whether the yield, whether the YQ or the quality, tend to be much better than the common controls that were being used within our experiments. And also this whole thing about the quality indicators not being linked to yield, but more associated with straw height. Again, that might be an artifact. I will just pick up on where we are with it here. So this was, while we were working on this since 2000, 2002, we were also working on the policy end because CCPs were illegal to market in the UK. So until recently they have been. We marketed this under the EU market experiment, and we marketed the YQ population really for the sole reason we had more YQ at the time, we could bulk it up. And actually, Martin's spoken more about it today, and Kimberly will tell you much more about her experiences with it over the next few days. And so we're in the process of marketing at the moment. The marketing experiment has been extended. We actually ran out of seed this year. I made a decision to sort of undersupply the market, and I did that really badly. We didn't have enough seed. Anyway, so we're hoping we've got a bigger crop in this year for the seed market. And I should just acknowledge that actually there isn't a single funder of all this work. We've been doing it since 2001, where it was funded by the UK government under 3 programs. Then it was picked up under Solibam and others under the EU programs, and it's still currently works being done on these CCPs under the Diversifood and the Live Seed EU programs. Thank you very much.